Right. Well, this is a very exciting day here at First Baptist Church. First of all, tomorrow morning starts Vacation Bible School. Could you tell that VBS must be starting up? These guys have been working all week long, getting Sunday school rooms set up, getting this stage area set up. Tomorrow morning, it all gets started. And I am very excited to say this is the first year in Vacation Bible School, and I've been pastoring now for over 25 years. And be honest with you, it's the first time I've ever had to stand up on the day before Vacation Bible School started and tell you, we got all the workers we need. Amen. Now, if you want to help, that's good news. If you want to help, we'll still plug you in because we can still always use some folks to help corral children, all right? And so if you want to help and haven't signed up yet, see Clarissa. If you know some children in your neighborhood, make sure you bring them tomorrow morning. It is going to be a great, great time. It's also very special today because we get to welcome back one of our former pastors, Dr. Charles Chandler, who served here as pastor from 1971 through 1976. And was the original Superman. He is here to celebrate the 40th, or it's the 40th or the 50th anniversary of the Superman celebration. He was the first Superman, and he is going to come this morning to preach. Before he does, I want to ask you, if Dr. Chandler married you, not married you personally, but did your wedding ceremony, all right? That would be really weird. All right, but if he did your wedding, stand up so we can kind of see. Dr. Chandler, look around. All right, lots of folks. And so we are welcoming him back and glad he's been here. Him and his family's here. If his family, I don't know where they were sitting in the sanctuary. If you guys would stand up, let us recognize you real quick. There they are. Give them a welcome. All right. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chandler. If you'd come and share the word with us this morning, and you give him a round of applause as he comes and welcome him this morning. Go ahead, come right up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Joe. It is a joy to be back to my hometown, Metropolis, Illinois. It's the place that my parents sent me when our planet exploded. Oh, wait a minute, that's my Superman speech. They did surprise me, though. They told me they had a surprise for me. When I got here, they had a lot of the Superman jerseys made up, and one with my picture. I looked at it for a while before I recognized who it was. A black-haired guy. I think he must have weighed less. Somebody said that age is a matter of the mind. If so, I've got a very old mind. And you can do the math. I was 36 when that first Superman adoption ceremony took place, and this is the 50th anniversary. I think that adds up to what, 46? I went back to my class reunion, 60th class reunion a few years ago. I was the only one I recognized. I'm not sure how they got older and I didn't, but stranger things do happen. One thing that, if you remember when those of you, how many of you were around here while I was pastor? Raise your hands. Well, maybe you better stand. The lights are shining, I can't see. Stand up if you were here. So we've got a few people. That doesn't mean they're all as old as I am, but there's a few of them around here. Good to see you. But after the ceremony, it would be a big surprise who Superman was. There was a youth event scheduled for the Sunday night following, and I could see they were just anxious to be able to say something, but they didn't know if they should or not. So I decided maybe I ought to just break the ice. And I was very concerned that playing that role, being involved in the community, would not affect my relationship to the congregation. So I told him, let's get something clear here. You see me wearing different things, but that does not change our relationship. Most important part is pastor and congregation. And I want to make sure that that is foremost. And you see me in a suit that's very old, with a big S on the front there. Or you see me in a suit, I'm still your pastor. And one thing I want to be absolutely understood, so that this relationship is never confused. Absolutely under no condition will there be any flying in church. So far as I know, that rule has not been broken. Brother Joe, have you done any flying in?
No, not lately.
Not? Okay.
I fall off the stage one day.
So he has confessed a short flight. And the other staff members can you pledge that you have not flown in church? Where I can't see where you are. All right, we'll assume they haven't either. But I was invited to be on the To Tell the Truth show, and found that to be a good experience. And I would get each of the two imposters and I would get $50 each for any incorrect answer from the four panelists. Kitty Carlisle, Peggy Cass, Nitzy Russell. Bill Cullen would have been the fourth, except he was on vacation. And Gene Rayburn filled in for him. Gary Moore was the moderator of the show, and a really great guy, very engaging, and he would come backstage and talk to all of us. They did the filming for a whole week at one day. They called me about the 1st of March, following that January 21st ceremony, to see if I would come up, and they would make all the arrangements and et cetera. And I checked with the Chamber of Commerce to get their take on it, and they encouraged it. So flew in, and then had to be there for the afternoon and night they do a lot of work on that. They assigned a person to work with an orientation session with the two imposters and me. And they were fearful when it was announced in the affidavit, and they made me sign an affidavit that said I would not lie, and then told the other two I believe his words were, he recognized I was a minister, lie like heck. And they were afraid that they would start asking them religion questions. And sure enough, we were lined up on stage, each one saying, "My name is Charles Chandler." And I was in the middle. And then we were seated. The panelists every one of them began their questions on me. And one of them asked Nipsey Russell, "How many books in the Old Testament?" He immediately answered, 23. Well, to me, that would have been a big giveaway. But Nipsey guessed him as the real, authentic one. Petty Carl asked Nipsey, "How many books in the Old Testament?" Now, she was Jewish. He said, "I don't know." He was Baptist. Peggy Cass was Catholic. Didn't know Gene Rayburn that well. Wasn't sure what he was. But then when they asked him why they'd chosen certain ones, Kitty Carlisle was first. She says, "I like the demeanor of number 2. He seems pleasant. He smiled. Said he sort of looks like a person that I would think of when thinking of a minister." Well, that made me feel pretty good. And then after she paused, she said, "Kind of benign." there went the ego. But it was a good experience, and good to have come back for the 25th and now the 50th. I have not yet committed to the 75th. But there's one thing I will mention to you. Can you imagine what it does to the ego to be called an ex-Superman? Someone that came in the door was kind enough to say, original Superman. Thank you. For our scripture this morning, in deciding what to preach on this morning, I've been gone 46 years. I thought, I guess it doesn't matter what I choose to preach on. They're not going to remember it after 46 years if I can't either. But it'll be sort of an abbreviated message because of my already having taken some of your time. I'm just going to talk a little about the drama of redemption. I'm going to read the first two verses in chapter 1 of Genesis. In the beginning, I think that's the most important words we'll find in this book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of this deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And then I'm going to turn to the next to the last chapter in the book of Revelation. Revelation 21, reading the first 4 verses. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things have passed away. Reading Revelation 21, verses 1 through 4. If I give a title to this, I guess I would call it Serendipity Beyond Imagination. The Bible is a series of portraits. It's generation, degeneration, and regeneration. If you want to really see it in its fullness, the first 2 chapters is the story of God creating, the creation. That's the generation. That tells us what God did. Chapters 3 through 11 basically tell us what a mess we made of God's creation. It's the fall of humankind. And then the rest of the Bible tells us what God did about what humankind did to his creation. That's generation, degeneration, and regeneration. The first 2 chapters are dealing with the creation. In fact, it really tells you 2 stories of the creation. One of them is primarily a philosophical description of creation. The other one is a more practical account of creation. Each of them helping fill in some of the holes that we would miss in just reading only one of them. Through this process, God was at work. He was preparing things, preparing a universe. He formed it all. He spoke it into being. We haven't been able to discover or even determine so much of what He created. It's so vast. But all of this He placed in place. He created it, put it in place. And then last, after everything else was prepared, all was in readiness, He said, let us create man in our image, our likeness. I think He was speaking to all the heavenly hosts. I think He was speaking to all human beings following. In essence, saying, you will be partners in this process. Multiply, go forth, replenish the earth, fill this earth. And then He built that beautiful garden and placed in it humanity. Such a beautiful thing. Everything they could have ever hoped for, dreamed for. Serendipity. That beyond belief for which you really had nothing to do with to create. It was an unexpected gift dropped in your hand. I think they added this to the dictionary 2 or 3 decades ago. I don't spend a lot of time reading the dictionary. Change subjects every paragraph. But if you look at that word, you'll discover that it talks about things that are beyond our control, that just fall into our hand. We did nothing to deserve it nor to get it. It's a gift, wonderful gift. I remember a guy telling about one time in explaining that word that he and his wife had taken a trip. And they just told him, sir, we've oversold the coach. We're going to have to bump you up to first class. Serendipity. Who's going to argue with being bumped up to first class? Now, that actually happened to Betty and I one time. We were flying to San Juan. It was an anniversary celebration. And we were actually doing a cruise when they were bringing a ship from the lower areas back up for the higher areas during the summer. So it was leaving San Juan. It was going to make several stops at various islands and then end up at Norfolk, Virginia. And we only lived 100 miles away in Richmond. So that was great and dirt cheap. But we decided we'll go 2 or 3 days early and explore Puerto Rico. We got to the plane. I had my reservations. Sir, actually, we had gotten those reservations because we had given up a seat on a previous flight in exchange for tickets wherever we wanted to go. We're going to need to bump you. And my heart sank when they said bump. We're going to have to bump you up to first class. Wow. All the way to Puerto Rico. We got to Puerto Rico, and I had made the reservations at a Ramada Inn. That's sort of usually a good mid-range. I didn't know anything about hotels in San Juan. I wanted something decent but would not rob me. And then I went in and told them who I was, my reservation, and they looked and said, we don't have any record of your reservation. So I went back to the car and got my receipt from my reservation for, I think, about $125 we paid for the room per night, and showed it to him. He said, I'm terribly sorry, but that doesn't change the fact we do not have an empty room whatsoever. But I can transfer you to another place. And I said, you know, if you send me to Podunk, I'm going to be an unhappy camper. He said, you won't be disappointed. Well, with great intimidation, and we looked for the address and we found it. It happened to be the most expensive, elaborate hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It was between $300 and $400 a night for the 125 we were paying. Serendipity, twice on the same trip. Another person described serendipity as a young man who wanted so much to go to the prom, but did not have a regular girlfriend, and just dreaming if there's just somebody, and he waited too long to ask because most everyone would have a date. And suddenly, in the midst of wallowing in his misery, the phone rang. It was the homecoming queen asking him if she would go to the prom with him. Serendipity. Now, that did not happen to me. Generation, creation, and God setting forth a place for humanity. There was one restriction on that beautiful garden. They could eat of any of it. There was work to be done. Adam and Eve were to have dominion over it. They were to care for it. They were to cultivate it, and could enjoy everything in there except that one tree. Restrictions come hard sometimes. And here comes Mr. Serpent, crafty creature, and asked Eve, did God say you couldn't eat of all these fruit from all these trees? Eve tried to correct him. Well, God said we could eat from all of them except one. You see, he was creating a doubt in her faith and of the goodness of God. Did God really have their best interest at heart? Did God really have integrity? Just creating a little bit of doubt. Well, she did try to correct him. But he pointed out, well, God knows you won't die. You'll be like him. You can move from being subservient to God to being God simply by eating from that fruit. Well, that sounded like a good sales pitch. She tried it. She gave it to Adam. He tried it. And suddenly their eyes were open. They recognized they were naked. And they began to make clothing of fig leaves. And God came walking in the garden. They heard his footsteps in the cool of the evening. Just think, God comes by in the cool of the evening to have fellowship. But they weren't in any condition to fellowship with God. God recognized it. I'm sure God knew it from the beginning. God said, what have you done? And you can see some of that degeneration that's taken place. Not accepting any responsibility, but instead projecting blame. God asked Adam, what have you done? Adam said, well, this woman that you created, it's your fault. You created her. She ate and gave me some, and I ate too. And Eve said, well, that serpent, God had created the serpent too. In fact, he deceived me. He deceived me. And I did eat. Well, you know the story. They were banished from the Garden of Eden and then dwelt east of Eden. I don't know the implication of the east, but you're no longer in that place, and put an angel there with a sword, guarding the gate. Degeneration. About 9 chapters, it tells us about what we did, humanity did, with God's beautiful and perfect creation. And then comes regeneration. beginning with the story of Abraham, a covenant with a nation, 10 commandments as guides for living in community with one another under the leadership of God. A foundation with one God being the pillar on which all the others lived. I like to think of the 10 commandments as sort of a pyramid, each layer laying on another foundation below it. 5 of them dealing with a vertical relationship to God. And then 5 that deals with the horizontal relationships. We cannot adequately deal with the horizontal relationships, and so we've dealt with the vertical relationship. One God. Hands off my name, my day, and then my name. And no substitutes, that second one. And then honor my representative, that is, parents that have been brought into the process of creation, representing God as the human instruments. All of this in order. And then he said, reverence life. Hands off someone else's life. Hands off the marriage bond. Hands off the property. Hands off of bearing false witness. And then that last one, sort of an apex. Don't even think about doing these things. If you start thinking about it, you'll begin to covet it, want it. If we begin to do that, we begin to rationalize how we deserve it, just like Eve did with the serpent. God knows you won't die. God's keeping something from you. You deserve it. And so, on and on and on. He sent the prophets. They killed the prophets. Last of all, he sent his son, Jesus Christ. And you know what they did to him. But it was only with the coming of Christ that the revelation of God reached an apex. All of the miracles, all of the prophets, all of the wisdom, they were able to turn their back upon. Jesus came revealing the very heart of God. Not just philosophy, not just practical applications, but here the heart of the Father. The love that is unceasing, the love that is transforming, that makes a difference in life. And we see Jesus giving himself through that process. The Apostle John, so far as we know, probably outlived all the other of the disciples, right, most of them. On the island, in exile, looked up and said, I see a new heaven, a new earth, regeneration. God wasn't content to leave humanity after they messed up the beautiful garden he had created for them. He created a paradise, a new heaven, a new earth, where there's no pain, no sorrow, no tears, no death. And it's within our reach. A double serendipity. We cannot cause it to happen. God made the provision. Jesus said, I go and prepare a place for you. Would I go and prepare a place for you if I were not going to come and get you and take you to be with me? Within your reach. But you will have to accept what he offers. You know, I could hand my Bible to Brother Joe here, hand it all day long, but it wouldn't be his if he didn't accept it. Take hold of it. Personalize it. And that paradise that Jesus says, I go and prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you can be with me also. the beauty of heaven, all that's there. But I won't leave you desolate. Those of you who are left on earth, I'll send the Holy Spirit to be with you, guide you, help you. Help us to be inspired, to understand, but also to be that help during troubled waters. You don't go through life with everything being rosy. There are periods of pain. There are things you don't understand. They're beyond your control. I got a terrifying phone call one night. It was so distraught, it took me a while to figure out who it was calling me. It was our daughter-in-law in Alabama, telling me that our son, whom we call Corky, and many of you will remember him, had drowned that day. The police had just come and notified her, and though they lived in Alabama where he was an endodontist and had his practice, but he had gone up to West Virginia. He loved to kayak and whitewater raft. And his work was very tedious, so he really loved the outdoors. I had done many funerals. I had walked with many people through troubled times as they lost loved ones. But it is different when it happens to you. You can't change it. I first started thinking maybe it's false identity. Then I got to thinking, well, if it's false identity, that means I'm wishing my pain on someone else. So I couldn't pray that it was a false identity, and it wasn't. But even through those troubles, the shadow, the death, there's still difficulty. But His Holy Spirit walks with us. We don't have to be alone. Serendipity. Even in troubled times, heart-rending times, His presence is available. Life can take on new meaning. In looking back in retrospect, I've discovered that most all of my spiritual growth has come during periods of pain. And I think that's a byproduct of any painful experience we have. That in some way, God can work with us and we can grow through it. And it can be a new day. Serendipity. Something God gives. Beyond our reach, but He offers it to us. This morning, you may have already settled that issue in your own mind. If you haven't, now is a good time to make that decision before a congregation who will be your prayer partners, undergird you, and walk with you. For 22 years before I retired 5 years ago, I had formed and led a group called Ministering to Ministers, a nonprofit. We worked with ministers in distress through painful times. We created a group we called Friends for the Journey. And I got a $25,000 grant from a foundation to bring 40 ministers to Richmond. Went to the Missionary Learning Center. And for 3 days, all of them had been through painful times in their congregations. Some of them had recovered well. We wanted it to be those who had recovered and could use the experience to walk with others. Learn to listen, not be the answer to everything, but to walk with them so they were never alone. And to be able to assign them to some new person who might call me. There's a sense in which that's a church walking with other people, using your experiences through which you have grown to help other people through their experience.